Hello everyone and welcome back to the good stuff. We are back at the 1857 First American Chess Congress and we are continuing the match, the finals of the First American Chess Congress, Paul Morphy versus Louis Paulsen. After the legendary Game 6, we are back at Game 7 and this is quite a weird one. The beginning is incredibly weird and the ending is incredibly weird, but you'll see what I mean by this. And I gave up on the whole Fortnite idea. It was a spur of the moment thing. After I slept on it, I decided that maybe I'll just stick to chess. So without further ado, let's check it out. Morphy again opens with e4. We have c5. Paulsen for the third time in the match goes for the Sicilian defense. Knight f3, e6, and d4. So the same as in game 4 and game 5, we have captures, and bishop to c5. The Paulsen variation, as Paulsen himself is playing it, bishop to e3, and then now comes queen to b6. And here, in game 4, the one that Morphy won, he went knight to b5. He offered this exchange, captures, and bishop to e2, which isn't really good for black, but Paulsen still declined. But here, Morphy goes for knight to c3. He just continues development, and he offers the b2 pawn. Now, is this pawn poisoned or not? It's a good question, but whether it's poisoned or not, still queen captures on b2. Paulsen captures it. And now feel free to pause the video and punish Paulsen for this early insolence while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting that the pawn was indeed poisoned and that the queen should be trapped. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight d to b5. Point is, you are now defending your knight here, the queen defends the rook, and there really is no defense against rook to b1, which traps the queen. Now, interestingly, there is one game from 2004 that reached this exact same position where black tried bishop to b4, saying that, okay, maybe I'll capture, and then after you recapture with the knight, I can run away. But it doesn't really work. After bishop to d2, the threat still remains of rook to b1. And if you trade here, white will just capture with the bishop, and the queen is still trapped. So there's nowhere to go. So that's bad news for Paulsen. But after Morphy's knight d to b5, Paulsen captured on e3. And here, it is as of move 7 that this position was never reached again, and for good reasons. And Morphy just continues rook to b1, and the queen is trapped. So makes you wonder why didn't Morphy try this in the first two games where Paulsen played the Sicilian. But now there is no good reply here. Morphy just gives up, Paulsen gives up the queen captures on b1, knight captures, and now bishop to f4, getting the bishop out of the way, preventing knight to c7 check by Morphy and the loss of further material. And it's not all that bad. Paulsen still did grab a piece and the rook, but all of his pieces are still undeveloped, and he has a lot to prove if he thinks he can still play this game. But okay, g3. And we have a6 now. Paulsen, of course, doesn't want to move the bishop, as he still needs to defend the c7 square. Morphy captures. He doesn't mind trading down, as he is up material. A captures, and then now knight to c3, going after the b5 pawn. Knight to e7, Paulsen prepares maybe to castle, and now knight captures on b5, preparing either check to win the rook, or just knight to d6 to hinder black's development. We have castles by Paulsen, and now knight to d6. And now, like I said, Paulsen did grab some material for the queen, but his pieces are completely undeveloped. Knight b to c6. He continues development, rook to g1. Of course, Morphy puts the rook on a semi-open file, and rook captures on a2 now, grabbing the pawn, but it's really not the greatest pawn to grab, as you'll see. Morphy continues with f5. And now the threat is just f6, busting open the position. Problem is, if you play something like captures, and f6, hoping that you will stop the attack, just bishop c4 check picks up the rook, so that's not even an option. So after f5, we have f6, preventing f6 now, but here Morphy goes for bishop to c4, puts more pressure on e6, also puts his bishop on this diagonal, attacks the rook, rook to a4, attacking the bishop. And now, as there are a lot of ways you could continue this, Morphy first plays f4, grabs more space, prevents the knight from coming to e5, and it's really hard for black to develop his pieces. Okay, Paulsen here played b6. He wants to develop his light square bishop, but there is a move that he could have played which is kind of better. And I will ask you to pause the video here and try to find it. Black will still be worse, but it's a very important technique to be able to play the best move even when you're worse. So feel free to pause the video once again while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who found it, congratulations on being a stubborn defender. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's not b6 but rather b5. And now the point is, what do you do here? If you move the bishop, then you just continue e captures on f5, and the bishop will at some point leave this diagonal, or you will go bishop to b3, then rook to d4 comes with an attack on the queen. You do get some development in, and lastly, but not leastly, if you capture on b5, then again rook d4, puts pressure on the queen, and after queen g4 threatening mate, now you go g6, captures, and white is still better, of course, but you were able to get some pieces into the game. The rook is nicely placed on d4, threatening the knight on d6, so white will have to move it at some point, and it's not all that lost just yet. However, b6 by Paulsen, much slower, but now Morphy just continues. F captures on e6, d captures on e6, and now Morphy goes for the simplest possible solution. He plays knight captures on c8. We have knight captures on c8, removing the defender of the e6 pawn. Bishop captures on e6 check, king to h8, and now Morphy has to go for either bishop to d5 to get to strengthen his position a bit, defend the e4 pawn, or just straight up queen to g4 threatening mate. And after, which is pretty much forced, rook a1 check. You can trade rooks here, captures. Now the knight can go here, let's say, and the game continues. But now the game is winning for white. So this is what Morphy should have gone for. However, Morphy played well, maybe not the worst possible move. The worst possible move was maybe queen to d8, just giving up a queen. Morphy played bishop captures on c8, and this is just bad because Paulsen captures with the rook, and Morphy goes for queen to d7, and it does make sense. Puts pressure on the rook, also threatens checkmate. If the knight moves, you can capture this rook, so it does make sense. And I'm going to use this for the thumbnails. It looks pretty nice, but it actually gives Paulsen a chance to draw the game. So feel free to pause the video and find this elusive draw. Both of them probably missed. Well, I give you a couple of seconds. So, for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting a draw in a seemingly lost position. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook captures on e4 check first, and after the king moves, let's say king f2, king f1, doesn't really matter. Now knight to e7, defending mate, the knight defends the rook, and what do you play here? Rook captures on c2 is coming, and there's not much you can do about this. For example, rook to e1, you go after the rook, you want to trade some pieces, just rook captures on c2 with check. King f1, you have to defend your rook here, but now just captures, and after knight to g8, you will not be winning this game as white, as there's black simply has too many resources. The knight on g8 is a beautiful defender. You cannot get past f6, you will not pass h6 as the knight defends it, and there's not much to do here. The white king cannot come into the game as the rook controls the second rank. You might try pushing h4, but it doesn't really matter. Rook h2, let's say queen g4 defense. Now you start pushing b5, h5, b4, and there's not much you can do. b3, king c1, you're going to go rook c2, check, king b1, rook goes back, defends the pawn, and there's no way for white to make progress. So by going for the simplest possible idea, in other words, giving Paulsen zero respect whatsoever, Morphy allowed Paulsen this drawing opportunity. However, Paulsen plays a different move. He plays, you could go for something like rook to g8, but then you give up the knight. So Paulsen instead goes knight to e7. And although this is the engine's third recommendation, it doesn't really do anything since the game is completely lost. Now Morphy could just grab the rook and say, okay, what do you have now? There's nothing to play. I defend the c2 pawn. It's completely lost. But Morphy instead, after knight to e7, goes for queen captures on e7. He even allows him to capture on c2 and give rook a1 check, but doesn't really matter. We have rook to a1 check by Paulsen, king f2, rook captures on c2 with check, king to e3, and it was in this position that Louis Paulsen resigned the game, and yet another victory for Paul Morphy in the finals of the first American Chess Congress. In this very weird Game 7. There is not much to do here. If you capture, well, there's obviously this mate threat. If you capture the rook, then it's just a back rank mate. If there's no rook a3 check to continue marching the king up the board as the queen covers that. So there really are no moves here for black. Of course, Paulsen resigned, and well, it was a good game. Paulsen blundered his queen very early on, but it really seems like Morphy was giving Paulsen zero respect for that. He just went for the simplest idea, probably didn't even check if he had any options. If he didn't want to calculate, he could have just played bishop to d5, like we said, guards the e4 pawn, and there's nothing Paulsen can do. But he did give him chances. And this is just something that, this is 1857. Even though players like Morphy, Adolf Anderson, and a lot of other brilliant attackers were just brilliant attackers, creating blistering attacks, beautiful combinations, they weren't really all that great when it came to defending. So if you came at them, chances are you would have won the game. But yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Haidar Kadim, Ali Asar, David Olovokere, Lucas Williams, and Henry Nielstein for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing the coverage of the Morphy Saga, we have one more game in the First American Chess Congress before we move on. Checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world, which is pretty much what happens online at the moment. But yeah, I have some exciting news in the next video, which I will also post today, so stay tuned. And like I said, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys soon.